Okay, of the things that make us up, if you were to cut, we'll say me, if you were to cut me open and look inside, once you got over the wonder at the biological specimen that I am, you would, and started sorting out my molecules, aside from the bone, which is its own sort of mineral substance, there's three main types of molecule that you're going to find, and really only three. Zach has his hand up.
Wait, my molecules, do you mean like elements or like...
No, I mean types of big
like enzymes?
Polymer molecules. Enzymes
Lipids?
are a subcategory of one of the three.
Lipids?
Ah, okay. All right. Lipids. Now, let's see if somebody else can come up with one of the other two. So yeah, lipids. Does anybody know what lipids are?
Fats?
Something
Lipids,
about the lips? I don't know.
lipids are not, have nothing to do with lips. They are
Let's not.
fats,
Oh, okay. I was just being...
waxes,
I was just being...
right? Fat,
Yep.
waxes, and steroids.
So
Nobody-
protein.
Which and I don't mean, oh, I sort of do mean steroids like people inject because they're chemically similar, but steroids are actually a special kind of molecule in our body that we'll learn about. But today is not about fats. What is not somebody else? Let's open up our game to other people. Who knows? So we've got fats, we've got lipids. That's one type of thing you'd find inside of me, believe it or not. And what else might we find? That's what meat is. Most of the time you eat meat, you're eating muscle. At least here in sort of mainstream America, which is protein. Protein. and protein can be things like muscle, hair, nails, lots of our organs made of protein.
Carbs.
Okay. Did you just say carbs?
Yeah.
Carbs, yeah.
Oh.
Carbs, carbohydrates.
Good sticks, yeah.
I should have made this longer. Carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, yeah. Carbohydrates, right? Eat less carbs. And those are things like starch, potatoes have a lot of carbs.
Electrolytes?
ES.
Yeah.
Straight sugar, starch, potatoes, sugar, pasta, bread has carbs in it. But okay, carbohydrates are composed mainly of three elements. Who can guess what they are?
Oh.
It's in the name. I'll give you a hint.
Carbon.
Carbon,
Hydrogen.
hydrogen, and eights. When we see the suffix ate in, God, this is terrible for our people at home. I apologize.
Nitrogen.
When we see, no, that's amino. When you see nitrogen, amine. When you see ATE, there's one particular element that usually you're thinking of in it.
Oxygen?
Yes, oxygen.
Oh, right.
Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen
Those
tend to be in carbohydrates. And so carbohydrates, that's really what we're talking about today. So I'm going to erase these two, and we'll get on with carbohydrates. What carbohydrates are used mostly for energy. Energy and energy storage, except in plants. Plants make their actual bodies out of carbohydrates, which we'll learn. Except plants, which build with them. We'll learn about that in just a little bit. Okay? All right. So this is the thing. When we learned our basic organic chemistry, we learned that there were monomers, the monomer, and that they're assembled into polymers. there's a little parentheses S around them because there's a number of different carbohydrate monomers and a number of different polymers. Mainly, when we talk about the monomer of carbohydrates, we're talking about simple sugars. And those can include glucose,
Sucrose,
fructose are two of them that you've heard of.
sucrose.
Sucrose is actually not so simple. Sucrose is a little more complicated, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so glucose is something that we actually saw a picture of before, and I'll draw a picture of glucose here that you do not have to draw. I'm going to draw it for your amusement, but you don't have to draw it. Yeah.
Is that C6H12O6?
Yes, glucose C6H12O6. And it looks sort of like this. Glucose is a funny molecule because it's carbons attached to other carbons. Here, I'm going to make it a little bigger. And then you won't have to do it again because I'm going to give you a simple format for it. I'll do it in blue so that it stands out from this. Let's see how I do it this. So you got a carbon here, got another carbon here. I'm just drawing the skeleton. Then there's an oxygen that's sort of stuck in the middle. Another carbon, another carbon, another carbon, and that's it. No, it's not. There's another carbon up here. CH2O, meaning H, H, O. No. CH2OH.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, and again, you don't have to write this. Good, nobody's writing this. I hope you're not writing this because it's a big waste of your time. There's a picture of this in your book. You can find pictures of it all over the place. I just kind of want to show it to you once. And then, coming off of this carbon, you have a number of H and OH. Notice how OH can go backwards or forwards. That's because oxygen, if you think about it, oxygen can make two bonds. Oxygen can be connected to two things, but hydrogen can't. So you don't ever have hydrogen like in the middle. So even if it's written backwards, you don't write like OH because that implies that the hydrogen is connected to both anyway. Don't worry about it. Just realize when you see OH going backwards that you always read it from the point where it's connected to the rest of the molecule. Okay, here's another OH, here's an H, here's an H, and an OH. Point is, I'm just showing you all the different bonds. Now, if I did this right, which I didn't, we should see, we should be able to count C6H12O6 just for the heck of it. Here's our carbons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's our C6. H12, hopefully. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Yes.
O6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Heck yeah.
Good job.
Yeah!
That's how you do it.
What's that?
That's how you do it.
That's what I'm talking about. Okay. All right, folks. So, but anyway, you don't have to. I mean, imagine if you had to draw that every time, because we're going to be drawing a lot of these. As it turns out, there's a lot of these that get stuck together in carbohydrates. And so, to make that simpler, this is what we draw. Okay, folks at home, this is important. Max, I'm talking to you.
We should draw one. Can we draw this?
Yeah, the guy in the Bahamas. Yeah, okay. Yeah, the guy in the Bahamas.
Hexagon! That is what we're going to use when we refer to glucose.
We get to shout out random shapes now?
No, I didn't say triangle or trapezoid or rhombus. I said hexagon. Hexagon, yeah.
I can't draw that.
You can't draw that? You better learn.
No, I can't draw it.
Then make a smiley face or something, but just remember it's supposed to stand for a hexagon. When you see a hexagon, it means glucose.
Okay.
Now, there are other ones. Fructose, we'll edit that out too. Fructose only has 5 carbons, and it looks like this.
Pentagon.
Thank you. Pentagon. Looks like a
Not
pentagon.
to be confused.
There are dozens and dozens of simple sugars. Those are our 2 most famous simple sugars, but there are many, many of them. But for us, we're just gonna do this, and sometimes we'll include the OH on one end and one of the H's on the other end. Can anybody think of why we might want to do that?
So you connect.
To make yourself not sound like a pervert.
No, I'm not even sure where that's coming from, but to connect them, says Mr. Rutledge, because remember when we talked about monomers, when Mr. Rebna talked to you about monomers and polymers, he was referring to how the H and the OH are kind of used to connect them, right? And we'll talk about that in just a second. No, we'll talk about it right now, because when we start, here, I'm gonna erase some of this stuff on top to make this a little simpler. Here, I'll do it up here. Here's our first, yes, for dehydration reaction. Just to remind y'all of what I'm talking about, because this is what I'm talking about.
Do you know what I am talking about?
This is what I am talking about.
Thank you, come again. That's OH.
Okay, just to remind you what we're talking about here. H and OH go together to make what? How we talked about this. They go together. And what this does, the one thing I want to say, they do, when they go together, they make H2O. Right? HOH, H2O.
What?
And the reason this happens, I just want to point this out because some people miss this the first time through, and it just seems like a blur of HOH and who cares and whatever. I just want to remind you that if we take these off, think of them as like connecting pieces, right? Don't forget, what's in the center here is a carbon atom. And that carbon atom has, there's another bond over here, and it doesn't matter, but just to remind you, the carbon has 4 bonds. But when these leave, that leaves carbon with nothing attached to it. And it has this extra bond. Each of them has an extra bond because these left. They're like, my hydroxyl group left me and I don't know what to do. And this one over here is like, well, hey, my hydrogen just left me. And so maybe we could be together. Know what I mean? And so they bond. And that's dehydration synthesis. So the dehydration basically leaves each one with an empty hand, right? That it wants to hold hands with some other atom, and so when you put them in the right situation, the water leaves and a bond gets formed between these two. And don't forget,
It's like Red Rover.
it's like Red Rover.
I don't know what that's supposed to be.
Let's not even. But don't forget. Oh, that's a long one.
Oh.
But
Yeah,
when the next one comes up, it's ready to do this forever. See, this one still has its OH on one end, so it can do the same thing here. It can form another H2O, leave another set of unshared electrons here. In other words, open bonds, and they can connect to each other. So that's the point of the dehydration. Just to review for those of you at home, for those of you who might still be wondering from yesterday, because organic chemistry can get a little dicey for people. But so this is how we join these together. So this is our first case of seeing an actual thing making a polymer. And so, all right, when we talk about our polymers, then we have to start using one more vocab word, and there's really not that much more to this, he says, lying slightly.
All the time. All the time.
When has anybody ever heard the word saccharin? Saccharin?
Yeah.
It's one of the sugar substitutes, and that's actually using a word root for sugar, which is saccharide. When you have one sugar, it's called a monosaccharide, meaning mono, single sugar, one sugar.
That's why this is familiar to me.
So, and I know this is the point where people are starting to think, my head's starting to spin a little. But I have sort of three more versions of this word: one sugar, monosaccharide, two sugars, and
Disaccharide.
many sugars.
Disaccharide and polysaccharide.
All right, so two sugars is a disaccharide, right? If I had just stopped here and left this like this would be a disaccharide. So how about green? Disaccharide.
It's not easy being green. Let us make sure there.
Two sugars. For example, I'll put many sugars in a little bit. So disaccharide, I think that lactose is when you put two glucoses together. It could be sucrose, but sucrose and lactose, which is milk sugar, are made of two sugars attached to each other. So disaccharide. It's not really that hard. People let the word saccharide throw them off because it's a long word and there's two C's in a row, and who the hell uses two C's in a row? Oh yeah, accent, succinctly. Never mind, that's all I can think of. Accident, thank you. What's your question?
You said that sucrose was more complicated than glucose.
I did, because there's two. So it's not simple. It's not a simple sugar. It's a disaccharide. I didn't say it was much more complicated. I said it was a little more complicated.
Polysaccharide.
Polysaccharide, now that's more complicated.
Yeah, that's complicated.
Polysaccharide,
Everything's always been complicated.
polysaccharide is just many sugars. In other words, we start stringing these sugars together,
Making polymers. Polymers.
polymerizing. There's some quality control issues there. I snuck in a bad one. But anyway, ... meaning these can go on. These get very, very big. There's several different kinds of polysaccharides, but basically what polysaccharides are used for is a little different. Monosaccharides and disaccharides, they're used for energy.
Fermentation?
So basically these are energy molecules. Can you give me 2 more minutes?
Sure.
Thanks,
I
Adam.
just need something to drink.
I understand. Tell you what. Simple sugars are used for energy.
Well,
When you drink Powerade or Gatorade or whatever, those are simple sugars. They dissolve in water. They get into your cells really easily and quickly. Yes.
Can we put sucrose and those in there too?
Okay. Yeah. You mean as far as energy?
Well, yeah, because I already did that, and then you
Right.
said
That's
that,
fine. Yes. Yeah. These are also used for energy. But once you put a bunch of these together, then they're not going anywhere. That's the whole idea. Is when you want to hang on to some energy. If I've got a lot of sugar in my system, my body will store some of it, and it'll store it in the form of a polysaccharide. Does anybody know what the name for this polysaccharide is? Simple. Trains. No, that's when we talk about lipids. That's one of the ways that we store energy in the form of lipids. Simply starch.
Oh.
So starch is a way to store energy
So
or,
the
for
salt.
later. So you put starch in your cells, and it doesn't wash away with water. It doesn't dissolve in water. It just sort of stays there. And so if you have sugar, it'll get used up. It'll wash out. It'll diffuse in and out of your cells. But starches will generally stay put. Yeah.
So doesn't salt draw starch out? Like when you're making like, well, I don't know, but I know when you're making pasta, like if you don't want to have a lot of starch in the strainer and then clog your holes and blah 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 blah, big long story. You use salt in the water when you're cooking it to draw the starch out.
Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting idea, but I don't really know about that. That could very well be exactly right, but I can't verify that. All right, I can neither confirm nor deny if we did that. Okay, folks, so I'm going to tell you 2 more things. How many things did I say the last time?
I don't even know.
So
We're literally almost there, folks. We're like a minute from being there.
let's get to
So
2 minutes left of class.
There's three kinds of polysaccharides. There's plant starch, which I just sort of showed you, and that's a long straight line of glucose, plant starch. There's animal starch, which is called glycogen. And that is the only difference between plant starch and animal starch is that glycogen has branches in it.
Shouldn't the plant ones have branches?
Plants have branches, but plant starch doesn't, ironically.
That's cool.
There are diagrams of this in your book if you feel like cutting yourself some slack and not drawing these. But plant starch has branches, and so, or animal starch has branches. And then the last thing, the very last thing, the really last thing is, I'm not lying this time, cellulose.
Oh yeah, man, the cellulose.
Yeah, cellulose. The cellulose is just, it's plant structure.
I thought that was.
And really, that's just, you really don't have to draw this. But, in fact, maybe I'll just show you, I'm going to show you a diagram of it. I have a picture of it.
Cellulose is what makes up the walls of the plant cells, right?
That is correct.
Get it. Wisdom bonds there.
It's been going and going and going. Oh, that's amazing. Okay.
Cellulose is just like starch. It's just like starch, but it's insoluble. When you put it in with water, it can't be broken down. The other thing you